Yeah, my dad is a very successful salesperson. My mom was a very successful salesperson. But I know a lot of people have stories of overcoming childhood trauma or challenges, right? Like I happen to have one of those situations at home. So kudos to my parents, despite being divorced, that was just like super supportive of Kristin, right? Like, I mean, anything I said I could do, I did. My dad was like, oh, you can do that, you know? And yes, you can have a mansion and a guest house. Like these are things that I thought of as a little girl, right? And he just me back. Anything I gave him, he fed it right back. And like, yes, you can.
All right, we're rolling, Kristin. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to have you on. Came highly recommended by Grayson, who I think is an amazing entrepreneur. So let me start with this. This happened to me early in my career in sales. So when inevitably a salesperson finds their way into leadership, whether they've been in there for a long time or they get there, how do you overcome? How do they maybe overcome the imposter syndrome? Because like, when I became a leader, I was definitely not the best salesperson that they could have had, but I was a really good leader and I could help people get from, you know, B's to A's or whatever. But I certainly wasn't like the highest. And I feel like that held me back for a little bit. So I'm curious on what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Imposter syndrome. It's a huge thing that we all go through. Right.
Yeah.
And because, you know, I'm writing a book, Be a Better Sales Leader. I've broken it into 3 pillars, whereas the first pillar is about getting out of your own way. And like part of that has to do with imposter syndrome and failing forward. And I think you just wrote the first chapter of my book, right? Or your first chapter is similar to mine, because I didn't have an instruction manual either when I got my first huge role of leadership, like 9 into being in corporate America at 24 years old, right? And right. To answer the question, I think reflecting back and kind of what's in the book is it's coming from a place of confidence, right? So understanding that you fell forward, understanding that you have to get out of your own way, and understanding that we all have imposter syndrome every single day, some days more than others, some roles more than others, right? Being at a place of confidence helps overcome the insecurities that come with the imposter syndrome.
No, I like that answer. I have had a lot of conversations around the idea of confidence and how to get and keep confidence, right? And like be more confident in yourself. But I'm curious to hear your take on how somebody would maybe channel that confidence or gain that confidence in themselves as a new leader.
Right. So it's a great question, because you either fake it till you make it, right? Or it's innate in you, or you have to ask for lots and lots of help, right? And all of that still is within this first pillar of getting out of your own way, because unless I had asked for and sought out mentors who had been doing similar jobs like alongside of me, who had helped me at other points in my small part of my career, they then can help guide you into, like, they might not have ever been the manager of global inside sales for this huge behemoth of a translation company, but they have had parallel leadership experience. So you might not find like for like, but at the same time, you can find other leaders who can help be your mentors, people who will challenge you, right? And that confidence then can be instilled in you as a point of like, they didn't know either. And so I can lead from a point of confidence, and that includes faking it till you make it.
All right. I read one of my favorite books in life is a super controversial one, and maybe that's why it's my favorite, but I learned a lot from it. Have you ever read The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene?
Oh, am I allowed to say no? I feel like that's
no. No. I mean, but it's also like a super controversial one. So I'm not surprised when people are like, I've heard of it, but it's not happening. One of the lessons that he goes over in there is like, as you move up the hierarchy, you realize that people above you are just as insecure, if not more insecure than you. Like as you move down the hierarchy ladder, the less insecure people become. And I thought that was fascinating and really kind of a boost for me, because when I learned that, I started to observe what was happening. And it was pretty true. Like, not that insecurity is a bad thing, but to be aware that like my boss is just as, if not more insecure than I am, is kind of like refreshing in the sense that like, all right, well, if we're all just trying to figure this out and we're flying by the seat of our pants, I guess I can give myself a little bit of grace and, you know, everyone knows that I'll get that hopefully in return. Right.
Yep. Right. For sure. You will get grace and empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
You know? But that's it. Everybody deals with imposter syndrome every single day, every single season, in every single role. And we learn to camouflage it. We learn to fail forward. We learn to lead from a point of confidence.
Right. I feel like good leaders are better than most of us at like waiting and then being like, wow, that worked out. I didn't know if that was going to do that. You know? And then just kind of playing it off like, oh yeah, that was the plan the whole time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I read another, there was a good friend of mine, his name's John, and he wrote a tweet that said like, if you spent 20 minutes with a founder, you'd overcome imposter syndrome. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. But tell me, more about maybe the attributes and maybe the other two pillars if you want to. I don't want to give your whole book away on here, but you know, it's not out yet. I haven't read it, so but I'm curious now. You've piqued my interest.
Great. Right. So the second pillar is, because it's a sales leadership role or book, it's more about sales, right? So KPIs, managing up, leading your sales team with rigor and like rigor in the process. So calls, emails, tasks, deals, like the management of all of that stuff. But really one of the most important parts of there is managing up, because if you're an individual contributor or if you're a leader or a leader of leaders, you still always have to manage up to an exec team, to a board, and like, what did they care about? So there's a whole pillar around that. The third pillar then is about professional growth. So the first and third pillar can be interchanged no matter what type of leader you are. Maybe this is a chicken soup for the soul kind of series where it's like, be better, take out sales and insert something else type leadership book. But
okay. No, I like it. I mean, I feel like that's one thing I've learned from doing this podcast is what makes you successful in one area of your life translates very well over to the next. Right. So like for me, one of my hot takes in sales is like philosophy over psychology, right? Because like, I've read all the sales psychology books. We've all been there. We all get it. Right. Like, but like, if you can't make it through the crappy parts of sales, it really doesn't, all the psychology really doesn't matter. And I wonder how you address that maybe in your book, but maybe also as a leader, like how do you manage through crisis in the sales world? Because in the sales world, as you know, very well know, high churn, you know, very ebb and flow, at least with your new performers, if you got new guys or girls or whoever. Right. So curious how you handle managing in crisis and stuff like that.
Right. So let's define crisis and then talk through maybe a few different ways, because I think that's the point, is the crisis of losing a deal, right? If you're a sales leader and carrying revenue and responsible for quota, you know, you lose one deal that could be basically detrimental to everything. So how do you hedge against your bets and 10x your pipeline or 3x your pipeline in order to assume the loss, right? How do you avoid putting all of your eggs in one basket so that you're not emotionally attached to that one deal that then you do lose, that then ultimately creates a crisis? You're laughing because you're sales too, right?
Oh yeah, no, we've all been there. We've all had the one account that was like, dude, this is it, right? This is the one. And then for some reason, but that's why I talk about philosophy, right? Because that's life, is like, you can do everything right and it can all go to hell in a handbasket, even though we did it all right.
Best laid plans.
Crazy. But yeah, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you. If you keep going.
No, I mean, well, that's it. So then managing through crisis, right? Do you have another idea and we can define that and talk about that?
You know, just like, how do you help manage like salespeople who are in slums?
Right. Oof. I did a whole podcast with somebody on motivating your team. I really think the foundation of that, it's in the book. I think the foundation of that is asking your team what motivates them, right? So like not making broad assumptions that like you're in sales and you're motivated by money, or, you know, if you ask your team what motivates them, you will get every answer back under the sun from my cat to
Right.
money and God and a lot of things. So understanding intrinsically what motivates them is what helps lead them through slumps, right? Because undoubtedly people go through seasons in their life, that whole work-life balance thing, like we all have lives outside of work.
Yeah.
And or they go through slumps because they do lose 2, 3, 4, 5 deals in a row, right? And like, how do you help reinstill confidence in them and motivate them to move forward? It's really tapping into what motivates them and using that as their true north.
Yeah, I've always heard that, and I definitely agree, because at the end of the day, it's like I had a mentor call it chameleon management, right? Where you really got to like, match everybody's style. And then one of the things that I go to as a leader is just like, and maybe give me your thoughts on this, but one of the things I go to as a leader is like that next deal. Cause like everybody's jazzed when they close a deal. Right. And so like one of the things that we did as a new manager and like with new guys was like the first thing that we did with new salespeople. I mean, after we trained them when we got them settled and stuff, was like, we need to get that first deal like as quickly as we can.
Yep. I love it. I love it. One time I was at the dog track with my grandfather, and I just kept losing and losing and losing and losing. I don't know if you know about dog tracks, but I did a box.
I love it. No, I love it. That's awesome.
I did a box quinella. So I basically bet every single dog combination to come in first and second. I guaranteed a win. Now, the only challenge here was if I won a long shot, I would have banked. And in this case, I didn't. But because my ticket, which should have cost $2, right, now cost upwards of like $80 to $100 because of the combinations I played, I still won. I won like $10. My grandpa's like, we don't bet like that. And I'm like, winning, Grandpa, we're in like the 6th race. And like, so it's the idea of like turning your odds back in your favor and getting them and finding something that like, can get you jazzed again. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, which is a great like method for people, because a lot of things kind of dive into, new salespeople just not knowing yet, right? Like how this is all going to work, or even like, like a seasoned salesperson, just going through a slump. Like you just need like that one, even if it's the $10 deal, right? Like you got to get it. You got to get it.
Well, in my world too, we're dealing with multiple millions of dollars of contracts, which is crazy, right?
It's bananas.
The win might be somebody like, the strategic outreach and saying like, we'll have a meeting, or like, yes, we actually,
that's a good one.
Or like, so it depends on the industry that you sell to and or the value of the deals, right? But like 100%, if you're selling $1,500 projects, $10 projects, find that win. It's literally a numbers game. But if you are looking for multi-million-dollar contracts, it's more about like identifying what is a win along the way and changing the narrative of the story so that the win might be something else. That three things leads to the revenue or leads to the outcomes that you're trying to get. But like, what is a win? Just take a year or two to close. So.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I've to be totally truthful, I've never really been, my jazz is like small, it's like SMB. Like I've never been an enterprise rep. And quite frankly, I've been homies with, I got a few homies who are enterprise reps, and I don't know if I want to do, I don't know if I'm that guy. That's all I'm saying.
Now you have another homie. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Enterprise sales are just, they're different. Like selling to Adobe is wild.
It is. Because that's how I was groomed when I first started in my industry. I'm in the translation industry, and I started into it a year out of college. I desperately needed a job. I was working at Saks Fifth Avenue on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, which is Saks, opening the most number of credit cards across all of the store employees. And I would literally have a manager that would be like, pick up that shirt. And I'm not even the type of salesperson that would like let the shirts go unpicked up, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, Israel just loved to like pick on me and be like, pick up that shirt, instead of leading by example, picking up the shirt and be like, Kristin, I know you're really good at it, but like just next time, can you pick this shirt up, right? Like that management style is so different. So it forced me into looking for a better job, a career job.
Yeah.
Corporate America, where I kind of like, I had graduated college. So I stumbled into this industry now. Yeah. And I mean, the rest is history. I was groomed into being an enterprise rep. So.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. So being on Saks Fifth Ave, by the way, I've been to that store in Chicago. It's freaking awesome.
Oh.
So this is another one of my hot takes, but I kind of want to get your story first before I dive too far into it. Tell me about how. Was there anything that translated from selling memberships at Saks and clothes and stuff like that to your current enterprise job? Was there like anything that kind of like prepared you at Saks for it?
People buy from people they know, like, and trust.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, the average consumer walks in off the store, or off the streets like you did, right? And you have to build a relationship with that person. And then hope that they come back and call you and like ask for the deals and then shop the whole store with you. I had one of those clients in my time there, but I think that prepares you, because at the end of the day, selling enterprise SERP solutions or selling clothes at Saks Fifth Avenue, it is that whole people buy from people they know, like, and trust. And you have to build that trust over here. You have to build that trust on the phone, on the cold emails, on demonstrating, you know, setting yourself up as a subject matter expert in the industry that you're now 24 and brand new in. Like, how do you do that, right?
Right.
And you kind of learn along the way. But
yeah, no, I like that, because I felt the same way. Like, I went from cars to like SMB, like tech, and I got so much heat. They're like, dude, this is not selling cars. And I was like, but if I just sold a $200,000 Benz, you're telling me that it's that much different than selling your $50,000 a year software. Like, and I'm just, and I did very well, because I just went in with that mindset that you had, right? Like, no, I think we can be friends, because like the guy, you know what I mean? I feel like we can make this work. I just got a lot of heat for it. And I was like, well, I don't know if it's that much different, because I don't know, I felt like selling a Benz was pretty hard to do, especially to like C-level executives, because who else buys a $200,000 G-Wagon?
Exactly, right. And you overcame imposter syndrome in that case. You're like, no, I've got this, right? Yeah.
And I think it just kind of goes back to there. Now, one thing I love to dive into, if you've heard any of my podcast, like I know you've listened to a couple, but I love to talk about this, because I love to have women in sales and women in business on my podcast. How was it for you being a woman in sales? I mean, obviously you're killing it and you're doing great. So I don't mean this question in any type of way other than maybe to inspire somebody else. Right. But how did you navigate being a woman in sales? Because sales is, it's a big male industry for the most part. Right. So I'm just curious to hear like your story on that, like how, you overcame any obstacles. Were there any obstacles, things like that?
Yeah. It's not what you're asking for, but like my sister is a corporate attorney. Well, she's at the law firm now. So she's an attorney, or she's a partner in attorney. So we're both we're both salespeople.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Amen.
Women leaders in male dominated industries, right? Or roles rather. And one of the things we always bonded on was pre-COVID, the amount you were flying on airplanes and getting upgraded to first class, and how you would often be the only woman in first class. I mean, kind of times have changed now. A, you're not flying that much for business anymore, and B, like there are a lot more women up there. But we would always talk about that as like an anchor point to like commonalities across just different industries and being women and leaders like in these spaces. And just kind of how those little wins, it felt like a win if you got upgraded, right, on a business flight for free. And now you're sitting amongst some other men and you're noticing, right, who you're surrounded by. Because the same thing comes at a conference, right? You're going there. If you're in a male-dominated industry, there's a lot of men there, right? Or if you're at an exec table, then there's a lot of men at the exec table if they haven't gone and done a great effort of diversifying, the balance of gender. Yeah. So it kind of translates all into like looking for those little wins and that point of confidence, because it really comes back down to that point of confidence, like having the confidence to know that like I deserve this seat in first class. I earned it. I deserve this seat at this exec table. I've earned it. Right. And knowing that like, it's just a byproduct of the hard work you've done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and obviously like, I mean, it's always just an interesting conversation, because I love, my first general manager in car sales was a woman, and I probably learned the most from her, because it's just a different, you just need those different perspectives. And I always appreciated it. I mean, I have a daughter, so I'm a girl dad. So I want to see all of it happen. You know what I mean? And so I always love hearing, how, and so I'll ask you, like, what were some of the tools maybe, or like mindsets that you've adopted to kind of help you get, maybe over some of that? Cause I'm sure it was frustrating at times. I'm sure it wasn't, I'm sure it wasn't like easy. Right. So like what was going through your mind? Like what helped you get through it, or were there any things you tried or did?
Yeah. I mean, in my world, like it comes down to like cross-functionally building partnerships across different groups in your company. And latching on to people who are smarter than you to help you innovate for a client, for example, to deliver something that the client didn't know that they needed, and or just like building something internally that's going to help drive efficiencies for your business, and relying on your counterparts, whether they're male or female, right? That's kind of like one way, because it helps elevate you. So like the tools and the resource would be like lean on your colleagues, those who are smarter and those who are doing things parallel to you that you think if you came together, you could build something great. And then another way would be like, I happened to go to an all women's college also, which wasn't in my path. I just ended up at St. Mary's, which is part of Notre Dame. And I'm from South Bend, so I didn't mentally end up there. My sister went there, and I went there.
So you're going there. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And you know, it really kind of just, I didn't go into the world thinking women were any less than men, or that we had less seats at the table than men. I just went in like everything was an even playing field. So maybe just having that thought process that it's an even playing field. And then the third thing, and we've talked a little bit on it before, is the mentors. Finding those. I have so many mentors in my life, and over half of them are female. And it's probably because of female empowerment and like wanting to aspire to be like these huge heavy hitter VPs in tech companies, right? That like, yeah, that's cool. You said something interesting that I never really like thought about, but your experience going to St. Mary's and then just coming in and assuming things. Do you feel like that maybe, do you feel like that, how do I ask this question, but do you feel like that kind of gave you a leg up, like a step ahead? An unfair advantage, yeah. Yeah, I just got the chills. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So send your daughters to St. Mary's.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because if you never knew anything different, I'm sure there was or at least maybe not none, but maybe very less often encounters where you're just like, no, what are you talking about? Like, this is exactly what's like men, women, doesn't matter.
Yeah, my dad is a very successful salesperson. My mom was a very successful salesperson. But I know a lot of people have stories of overcoming childhood trauma or challenges, right? Like I haven't had one of those situations at home. So kudos to my parents, despite being divorced, that was just like super supportive of Kristin, right? Like, I mean, anything I said I could do, I did. My dad was like, oh, you can do that. Yes, you can run the mile freshman year of high school soccer at 7 minutes to varsity soccer team. And I did it. And I can tell you how I did it if you're interested. But, and yes, you can have a mansion and a guest house. Like these are things that I thought of as a little girl, right? And he just me back. Anything I gave him, he fed it right back. And like, yes, you can. Yeah. So I also had that.
That goes into your third pillar of mentors. Like having those people who can have your back. I mean, obviously, and a lot of people don't realize like how big of a difference that does make.
It does.
That it does make a difference when you're trying to get somewhere, having people who just, even if they just say, yeah, like I do believe in you or whatever, like that's a huge one.
It's a huge one. And you should have multiple kinds of mentors. You should have mentors who challenge you and call you on your crap and say like, this isn't, you're not going to get where you want to go if you continue to operate like this, or, report KPIs like this. Like you need to change your thought process, change your activities so that, you can level yourself, right? That third pillar is actually like professional growth. But like the concept of mentors runs throughout, right? And I think that you need mentors. You shouldn't seek out mentors who are just yes people, but like inevitably your mentors will be your yes people because they're rooting for you. You can text them. They'll text you back. They'll humor you. They'll sit in their own podcasts, right? So,
Yeah. I like that. No, I think you have a good, your mentor is the guy who, or girl who always cheers you on or whatever. I'm from the Midwest, so guys is gender neutral to me. Oh yeah, that's right. You're from so you get it, right? You know what I'm saying? Okay, cool. Like dude and guys are gender neutral. So yeah, I think when you have your mentors, but I do have a couple like you're talking about. I do have a couple where I'll call them and they'll be like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, let's do whatever you need. And then I also call my other friends or mentors or whoever, and I'll be like, hey, this idea, and I know that they're going to tell me the truth. And I even have one that tells me every time I have a bad idea, and I always call him, even though I know he's going to tell me it's a crappy idea. I always want to hear why he thinks it's a crappy idea. I like having him. He's fun. Yeah. Even though he tells me everything, he's like, nah, dude, that's never going to work. You're crazy. I'm like, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. I'll do it anyway. Or good to know you're clear. Yeah.
Well, sometimes I have conversations with him and I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Or sometimes I'm like, no, dude, I think you're crazy. I'll do it anyway. So no, but I think that's pretty funny. Okay, now you dropped something in there. You said manage your manager. What does that mean?
Oh man, right? Like
yeah, that's crazy. I've heard of the idea of like leading from the back or like not, leading when you're not in charge kind of thing. But this piqued my interest. I was like, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. It's not a Kristin original idea for certain, but it's definitely a concept that you should, if you're trying to be a better leader, no matter if you're in sales or anything, like you do need to manage your manager. It's like, how can you stay like a half step ahead of them? We're not talking about leaps and bounds and years and years and years, but like a half step. Do you know your manager well enough to know what they're asking for, to like hedge against like the concerns that they're going to have about you or your team? I actually effectively did this last week, whereas we've been looking a lot as a sales team at our 90-day pipeline. And without asking, I simply put together a slide based on content or information data that was available readily to him that he looks at all the time. But by simply putting it on a slide and saying like, hey, this is what I'm noticing about my team's 90-day pipeline, I was able to answer a question before he asked it, to which was then met with favorable feedback. Oh, I think the rest of the VP team should be doing something like this. Let me talk with them in our next, team meeting. So like managing your manager has a lot of different intricacies. And
interesting.
It depends, but to me, it does mean just staying that much, like one half of a step ahead of their next ask, and like reporting up what you think that because he reports ultimately to our board. So like, because he's our CEO, right? So like my boss is our CEO, and our CEO reports to the board. And so like, what does the board want to know and care about in a way that they want to hear it? And the other thing is like in the way that they want to hear it. My team tells me the paragraphs of stuff, right? Like, I'm on the ground and they're telling me all the things. I have to simplify that in one bullet or less to right? Into like a very meaningful, concentrated takeaway for like what this means. And I think doing that helps you have a better relationship with your manager, and then it helps like them build trust in you and see you for future opportunities.
Yeah, I like what you said there, because it's something that we do in sales, right? Like a good salesperson will manage the objection before they come up. So like in your pitch, you'll be like, or whatever, you'll be like, hey, this is something that a lot of customers have an objection about, so let's handle it before you ask me, right? So it kind of shows that kind of confidence. But it's kind of like, customers do that too, where they're like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And you bring it up before anybody has a chance to like make it a big deal. And I know there's more to it, obviously, when you're dealing in a situation like this, but it just kind of made me think about that. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point.
It's a great parallel. I love it. I'll quote you in my book, and then we'll unpack. Yeah.
Just keep it. Take it for yourself. I don't care. That's not an original idea either. Because that's what's cool about sales, though. Sales to me is like, I had a manager who, when we would hire salespeople, he would ask them a trick question, and it wasn't like to sell me this pen, but when we were selling cars, he would say, why do you want to sell cars? Or like, why do you want to be in the auto industry or whatever? And inevitably, people would just say, oh, because I love cars. Me and my grandpa used to work on them all the time, and I can tell you everything about anything. And then he would ask a couple of questions, but it was a trick question because the right answer was, I just like people. Like, it was a trick question because it had nothing to do with cars. He's like, we're not in the car business, we're in the people business.
I love that.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
And so he would always just say like, he would always like trick him. And I was like,
sell me the pen. I mean, right.
Yeah, because it has nothing to do with it. It's just like thinking outside the box and realizing like, how would you, like people are people. So, because kind of to bring it full circle, that's what sales is, whether you're like a CEO and I think it's super interesting. Like when I had my little touches because I would do like medium businesses. So maybe they were doing like 5 to 20 million a year or something like that. So we would sell into those. So I would have brushes with, enterprise clients every now and then. And I would just realize like, I think the hardest part, what I learned about enterprise sales was what I kind of talked about at the beginning was like, everybody, you're having to multi-thread this account. So you got to find your champion. You got to find the 2 or 3 influencers. Then you got to find your decision maker, right? And you got to wine and dine all of them essentially. And that's going to take a while. And I just realized when you're dealing with that many egos, it I was like, dang. And not everybody, right? Not everybody's doing this, of course, but it was nuts.
Yeah, agendas. That's honestly where I was originally going with the Saks Fifth Avenue stories.
Okay.
I ended up at SDL, which is now known as RWS, to be inside sales and then manager of global inside sales. But the way I was trained as an inside sales rep, commonly known as a BDR now, right? SDR, whatever. Yeah. We were enterprise selling. So like I was being tasked to map the account, have the conversations with the various decision makers, understand which buying department had buying power, which people within the organization had the influence, right?
Yeah.
Who was going to be a blocker, who was going to be an advocate. Yeah. And right. I just never looked back. So it's just kind of like, to me, crazy that I ended up there because, but you can build a very successful career selling, like my dad, toilet paper, right? My dad sells paper.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it just, you get in some of these industries, like sales is such a broad industry, and you get into some of these avenues of sales and I'm like, holy cow. Like there's a lot of those guys like they do like they also sell like the uniforms. So they'll sell uniforms or they'll sell whatever. And you're just like, man, I didn't know you can make 6 figures. Like I used to get made fun of for selling cars. They're like, you can't make any money selling cars. And I'm like, well, we're at Disney. Like, call me I'll talk to you when I'm back from Disneyland, right? Like, and you're not. So like, it's just crazy. But when you treat people right, you just get paid for it.
That's what it comes down to, I think.
Well, what do you think? Okay, as a sales leader, what do you think when you get? Because I don't know, and maybe it doesn't happen in bigger companies like this, but I've seen it in smaller companies where there's like a salesperson who probably shouldn't have been hired as a salesperson because they just don't understand like the industry, right? Like as far as saying something like the term is order taker, and I don't really like that term, but when I say that, yeah, you're shaking, exactly what I'm talking about. So like what happens when you get in a situation where you have maybe a sales leader or someone who's like that, who's not really aggressive, who doesn't really understand maybe like the urgency of sales.
Yeah. Well, that's 2 different questions. The way I heard it, ultimately, I think, it's hard. Something I've learned a lot as a leader is like this. If it truly isn't the right fit, it's not like, oh, I'm going to come in tomorrow and fire you because like, I don't like the color of your shirt. Right. But like, if you're an order taker in a strategic business, if you're not being a good listener to your clients or hearing the true needs, like it kind of fundamentally comes down to like, the sooner you let them go, the happier they will be as individual contributors somewhere else. Right.
Yeah,
I mean, they're not probably, we all can close our eyes and think about various sales jobs we've had over the course of our career, even at Saks or in my first corporate jobs, or, where the person isn't, there are people who are not performing, and you are really like, how did you get to that job? That's when I first realized, like 3.5 years into being inside sales, I was like, I mean, if they can do this, I can do, like, I can be, it was outside, it was like, it's outside sales for us, but it's not, it's still like, my industry's worked from home forever. So it's like, like if that's what outside sales is, I can do that. Because there always are just like that one person that like, what?
Yeah, you're like, how did that happen, dude? I was like, I'm struggling over here. Like,
a little more politically correct the higher you climb on the ladder about that. As an individual contributor on the ground, like that is kind of,
you're like crazy. But no, as a leader, you got to know, like, there are some, like, I would rather have, like, you know, and I was only ever a manager I've never been a manager of sales people outside of cars or like digital marketing. So I can't really, but I've had conversations with other leaders, but, you know, just when we were back in the you know, the car world or if we're in digital marketing world, like I can see, you can spot them, man. I would rather have 3 people who are like B pluses than like one A plus person who gives me brain damage or just causes problems. You know what I mean? I think that's crazy. I don't know. I know you still have your corporate job, so you probably can't talk a lot about that, but that's just my opinion. It's like, dude, I don't care. Like, it really doesn't matter how much you sell, in my opinion. Like, if you can't get along with people, like you don't fit into the culture, you don't fit the vibe or anything, you got to go.
That's a whole thing, right? Like, as a leader, I think your responsibility is to help foster a positive culture. Something that I like very proudly did with my current team is like, we're at like Team CART. We created culture nodes that individually the adjectives stand for like the things that we represent. So we came up with collaborative, accountable, responsive, and transparent. And then so my team collectively came up with these adjectives. And then somebody on the team was like, oh, if you put them in this order, they spell cart, right? I mean, they spell a bunch of different words, but it spells cart. And so ultimately, we use a shopping cart as our like team icon, and we live and breathe by this concept of cart. So if you're a manager of managers who have all these other teams, like your company ultimately has a culture, right? Yeah. And the team, though, you have to create microcultures within the larger team that both attach to the corporate culture, but then also are a culture in and of themselves. I just think it's super important to thrive, because then you're like, well, yeah, like Jane Doe or, Jim Bob, like they don't fit into the culture, but like, then there's other attributes as to why, right? They're not performing, not meeting their metrics. You know, they're not doing the things that they say they're doing.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point to bring up, because you have like these, because corporate culture really does get lost on salespeople. Like it really does. Like, hey man, listen, I get because I've been there as a salesperson, like as an individual contributor. You see the stuff on the wall and you're like, dude, yeah, but listen, like I've never talked to you. We've never brought up that word. Right. And my team, we're just trying to float. You know what I mean? Like we're just trying to make it. And so like, it's wild about like how quickly that microculture becomes like almost the most important thing. Because especially if you're in a bigger company, and I'm not saying this with all big companies, I'm sure they do really well. Like if you have a micro cultures there. But no, I've been in big companies where like the company culture was just like, I could have missed it on the way in.
Nowadays, like, are you working in the corporate office? Like, is everybody in the same location? Like, how detached or attached are you to the water cooler? There's a lot.
No kidding. Okay. Well, I don't want to take your whole time. You've been really generous with it. I'm super grateful. But if you could leave sales leaders, or maybe somebody who's aspiring to be a sales leader, with one piece of advice, what would you tell them? Where do you start?
Yeah. Keep going, right? Start at the beginning, right? Fail forward. Right. I would say, ask for help, get mentors. Ultimately, like you can lead beyond your role if you have the confidence and the capabilities, and you understand like the greater landscape to like, and you know where to ask for help. So just keep going, right? And seek help.
I love that. Absolutely. No, I'm grateful for you being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was super fun.